Canada has been looking good at the Canadian Shield, opening things up at the Gold Cup, gentlemen. And we've also seen some different faces, some different starting 11s. And it's crazy because I would think that at the beginning of the year, we probably could have named the starting 11, or at least 9 or 10 of the players, right, guys? And now you're kind of sitting there going, I don't know what the best 11 could be, because now there are options. And as crazy as this is going to sound, Ollie, I'm wondering if this is a good or bad thing. And I only say that because when you have so many options, so at some point you have to buckle down and choose and create some chemistry. That's the only reason why I say good or bad. So have your say on that.
I think it's a good thing. I think it's undoubtedly a good thing in a number of different ways. Like there was nothing wrong with Canada's starting lineup going into Nations League that was quite settled, and there is something to be said for stability. But I just think having some competition in this team has been something that they've really lacked. It's even in this generation for Canada, it's kind of felt like, we have the top end talent, but Mexico and the US still have the depth advantage on us. Maybe that not to a full extent, because I think they still have much deeper overall player pools. But in terms of the 23-man squad or whatever you want to talk about at a tournament, to me, Canada's starting to look like they have more options and more depth. And I think it's giving them an ability to change the dynamics of the starting lineup in terms of the balance of the team. I think we've seen that a little bit over the past couple of weeks in the Honduras game, in the Ukraine game, in ways that have been beneficial. And it's going to give them more ability to have cover, to have options if they go to a major tournament as well. Like, I think we all remember at the World Cup how light they were in central midfield. It was exacerbated by Stefan Eustaquio obviously getting injured in that second game, and you just didn't have the players to replace it. Now, if something like that happens, you look at that group as an example. You've got Saliba, you've got Kone, you've got Matthew Chouanier, even an experienced player like Jonathan Osorio beyond Stefan Eustaquio. It's just a completely different, I think, complexion to this team and this squad, and I think it's only a good thing for them.
Mm-hmm.
I would echo that 100%. I think it's always important to have depth, and I think the key is how you use that depth. And I think Jesse Marsch has done a fantastic job. I think for me, one example I'll highlight is I went to the training session yesterday, the match day after, and usually that's a bit of a, I've been to a few with the Whitecaps and others, and it's the day after a game, especially if you win, it's a little lighter. Guys are on bikes, maybe you're doing a couple rondos. Guys who didn't play are going through their paces, but it's nothing crazy. Yesterday, it was just like the guys who didn't play were just having the most intense session, small-sided games. It was just game intensity, and, kind of asking the players like after, they're like, yeah, that's just how it is, because they know, okay, we didn't play in this game. We want to play on Saturday. We want to make Jesse Marsch have to put them in the lineup kind of thing. And that was kind of the mentality. And you can see throughout the group, it's raising the level of training. And then Luc Dufourgerol has that comment, which is very interesting, where he's like, yeah, right now training is harder than games for us, because there's this mentality where you want to win a spot. You want to play with a certain intensity. And I think we're starting to see that spill over into the games where the 11 guys who are named to start on the field, if it's because they earned it or if there's injuries, et cetera, they know, okay, I have to play well, because if I don't, there's someone right behind me who's going to take that spot. I think there's a nice edge right now where they're just so competitive, so hungry to earn that spot. And they know that the World Cup is only potentially 23 or 26 that they might not get in, that's creating this very intense mentality.
I love hearing that. And that's how it should be, right? Because then come game time, you're perfectly conditioned. And in fact, it was after the Canada-Ivory Coast game where they had locked up the inaugural Canadian Shield, and here they were running laps. Everyone, even the players who played in the game, were basically told to run laps by Jesse Marsch. Maybe I'll be the only negative Nelly here, because as much as I love options too, and I love depth, you then have choices, which means you've got to get those choices right. You've got to make sure that you nail it. But at the end of the day, this is very exciting to see all these different positions now have options. So maybe take it a little further here. I don't know, Ollie, if there was a certain position that you thought was locked up, that maybe based on these most recent games, you feel is actually up for grabs?
Yeah, the back four, which has been almost the same in every game under Jesse Marsch, Davies, Cornelius, Bombito, Johnston. I think there are really interesting questions there now about what the best kind of group is and what the best balance is again for the team. I think that has changed a little bit. And if you're Canada and you're going to play two really aggressive high and wide wingers like Buchanan, like Schaffelberg, like Ali Ahmed, does it then make sense to play fullbacks who are kind of the same ilk, right? Like Alphonso Davies is? Or do you look at someone like Nico Seeger? Do you look at someone like Richie Larea? Both of these players are midfielders converted to fullback. They give you a little bit more ball security. They give you a bit more patience. Positionally, they're intelligent. Is that a better fit to play behind the type of wingers that Canada have in terms of the overall balance of the team? That's not saying that Davies is going to get dropped, obviously, but does it reopen the debate of him playing further forward, potentially as one of those wingers, as opposed to at fullback? I think that will absolutely be something that's up for discussion when Davies eventually gets back. And Seeger in particular has made a real impression. I think he's been excellent.
Mm-hmm. What about you, AGR?
Yeah, well, I like the back four. Shout another name I'd throw in the mix is Luc de Fougerolles, just because if he plays up to his potential over the next 12 months, it's going to be very hard to keep him out of a starting lineup. I'll also look in midfield because I think heading into this tournament, there are some questions of, does Canada's depth, is it strong enough in midfield, especially with no Eustáquio potentially for the first few games? And now I think what we saw with Mathieu Choinière stepping up in his stead, very encouraging. Nathan Saliba, I mean, Jesse Marsh has been raving about him, and you can see why with the performance he put in against Honduras, what he showed as well against Ukraine. Ismail Kone didn't even see a minute of the field, and he's someone who's going to have a bit of a fire lit under him. He wants to be, a starter. It felt like after the last World Cup, he was the lock to be a starter for this tournament. I really look at that midfield battle with such fascination because if there's only two spots, who do you pick? Eustáquio is the one lock, but all of a sudden between Choinière, Saliba, Kone, could depend on form, fit, style, and that's really a choice I don't envy making. There could be some uncomfortable discussions to be had there.
Guys, offense gets the glory, and right away everyone wants to have this conversation about who's going to be next to Jonathan David and leading the charge because of how we saw them play. Promise David and Daniel Jebison, right? These are new names. In fact, it was during that Canadian Shield that Promise David, made his debut for the national team. But there were some fans that went, excuse me, hold on a second. Do not count out Tani Oluwaseyi. And he goes into that game against Honduras and he does get a goal. And I don't know if we're still of the same mentality here, Ollie, where you think this is Kyle Larin's position to lose, or do you think somebody like Atani is now inserting himself to hold that position?
Yeah, I think it's probably changing a little bit, not really because of anything Kyle Larin has done wrong, but because of the emergence of some of these guys. And Tani Oluwaseyi just hasn't been talked about as much because he doesn't play in Europe. It's as simple as that for me, but I think he is every chance of being right at the front of that conversation. Daniel Jebison, he's one I kind of put to one side for the time being because I think he has potential, but he's a project. He's going to need games next season, and that's going to really define, I think, his role in 2026. The other two, Promise Davids and Tani Oluwaseyi, they're both in great form. They both play regularly for their clubs. They're both showing a lot of good things. I think it's kind of a matter of preference right now for Jesse Marsh as to which one you feel like you can trust the most and get the most out of. I think they both give you obviously great pace, playing on the last defender, not needing to come short and get a load of touches, which I think allows Jonathan David the freedom to take up those spaces. And then maybe where there's a little bit of difference is Tani maybe a bit more accomplished on the defensive side of the game and kind of leading that press right now. That seems to be something Promise David is still learning a little bit. Promise David has this amazing explosiveness around goal that is really irresistible and hard to leave out at times. But Oluwaseyi is, again, you look at that goal against Honduras, he's showing his ability to put the ball in the back of the net as well. So it's tough to pick between those two for me. Oluwaseyi right now has a bit more national team experience and seems to have a bit more trust with Marsh, but that's a really interesting race, I think, to monitor over the course of this tournament.
Yeah, I think for me, looking at both of them, what I've liked is because we've now seen sample size of Promise David starting versus Ukraine with Jonathan David underneath, and we've now seen Oluwaseyi start, is just Jonathan David benefits so much from having guys like that who also love to stretch the field. Like they love to run in behind. That makes a huge difference because, a guy like Kyle Larin, he's a bit more calculated in his movements. He's always been a bit more of a second striker type who likes to drop deep. And when you have an Oluwase and Promise David who are just out and out nines, who want to stretch the field, who want to be up against defenders, who want to be throwing elbows, who want to be just creating distractions, Jonathan David thrives off that, because all of a sudden that gives him that half second more of space to operate in the pocket. All of a sudden, if Canada goes long and Oluwase or David wins that first knockdown, it drops to Jonathan David. He has that extra bit of space. I think the Honduras game was a perfect example of that, because imagine thinking that Canada would score 6 goals and David would just have one involvement, yet just all the chaos that was created up front by Oluwase and then Promise David when he came off the bench created so much space for David to help create plays. It created space for Seager, Larea to get involved, Chouanière, Saliba. And I think sometimes with Canada's prior attacking setup, it would just get a bit static and would all kind of die. And right now, for whatever reason, when Oluwase and Promise David are there, they just create space for others. And I think it's kind of created where it's probably going to be a battle between two of them. And if Daniel Jebison can add that to his game, we'd throw him in the mix. But I'm really liking that from Promise David and Oluwase.
And that's going to be the question, I think, is not necessarily who you think is the outright best player. It's who's the best partner for Jonathan David. The team is built around him now.
Yeah. And that's a valid point, because sometimes it's about that partner who brings out the best in others, that suddenly your team has this completely different dynamic and chemistry about it. I'm going to make the declaration. Taan Buchanan is back. He's back, baby. He's been looking fantastic. He's been setting up goals. He's been scoring goals. And the last few years have been really tough for this guy. It doesn't seem like that move to City out kind of worked for him. He's obviously on loan to Villarreal. Broke his leg, injury bug, just seemed like he couldn't shake it for the longest time, guys. Are you looking at him right now, Ollie, and saying a healthy, confident Taan Buchanan, he can be a difference maker for Canada?
100%. I think when you look at those wide areas and the options they've got there, he's the one who, when he's fit and in form, he's a locked-in starter. I think there's a debate to be had about the rest of them in terms of who would play from the beginning and who would come off the bench. I don't think that really exists with Taan Buchanan when he's playing like he is right now. And it's a really important Gold Cup for him, because it sounds like he's probably, you would think almost certainly going to be on the way out at Inter. Said in his interview with KJ, I think, that he hadn't really had a ton of contact with Inter about the Club World Cup. He wanted to play with Canada and come and play the Gold Cup. And this is the platform, right? He had that opportunity with Villarreal at the end of the season, did well there. Now he gets an international tournament to show any potential suitors, this is the player I am. This player is still there, the one that, Inter wanted to sign from Club Bruges. And he's ready to go. So it's a really important few weeks for him in terms of determining his future, as well as just getting back into the swing of things with Canada.
Listen, before you answer, AJ, I just want to say I knew something was up at Inter when we had him on our show last year, and I asked him about Italian food. He's like,
Didn't like the food.
Yeah, and I'm like, bro, if you're not fueling yourself properly, if you're not liking the food, it's not going to work out. I was a little heartbroken.
Maybe you should go to England for a different kind of cuisine,
You seem to like the paella a little more based on his time.
I think he likes the paella over the lasagna. I'm a little taking it a little personally, but it's okay. Ollie, listen, I love fish and chips. I love fish and chips. I'm not going to say no to that either. Then again, I will never suffer anywhere I go because I eat everything. That aside, I knew it wasn't going to work out based on the food. But AGR, what do you make of just Taan Buchanan being back and looking great?
Yeah, I think his situation is the perfect example of why, when you maybe push for a youngster to go to Europe or for a guy to make a bigger move, that it isn't necessarily where you play, but it's, how you play and what you're playing. And I think the combination of Buchanan having to play a wing back at Inter and then just not playing enough at Inter really hindered him, because I think what's forgotten in this is the injury happened and it, of course, hurt his stock massively for Canada. But he'd lost his starting spot at Copa America before the injury anyways, just because he'd lost confidence. He didn't look like himself. Jesse Marsh was already starting to put Richie Larea at that position in his stead. So at one point when he was at Bruges and when he was at New England, he was up there with the Jonathan Davids, Alphonso Davieses of this team, Stefan Eustachios. He was that important. So I'm just ecstatic to see him back to that level, because like Ollie mentions, that's what he does. And I think this is going to be an important message to the rest of the guys in the roster, because there's a lot of guys who have some very interesting moves to make this summer. And it shows that, okay, even if an Inter comes calling or a club of that caliber, you have to make sure it's the right move, because It's all about how you play and where you play. And when you're at too big of a situation where things can get loud, it can be tough. It can have a big effect on you. And I think Buchanan saw that firsthand. So it's great for him, because that cannot have not been easy for a player to have gone through a move like that, and just everything's gone through since. And it's good to just see him with a smile, because he's kind of one of those players that needs that swagger, that needs that confidence. And when he has it, it's incredible to see.
Mm-hmm. Well, as important as we know it is the way these players perform with the national team, Taan Buchanan is one of a long list of Canadian national team players whose pro situation is in flux. Where will he end up? And the type of playing time that he will get leading into the 2026 FIFA World Cup. So, of course, we will be watching where he lands very closely.